Welcome back, America. Justice Corrupted, How the Left Weaponized Our Legal System. This book couldn't be more important than it is today. Ted Cruz, it's out on Tuesday. You can get your copy at Amazon.com immediately, and it'll show up at your steps. It's very important to read this before the election, America. What about January 6th? What do you make of how people are being prosecuted? They don't seem to be segregating the people who are nonviolent from the people who are violent, and overall they seem to be treated much differently than leftists who create all kinds of mayhem.
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right, Mark, and that's a big topic of this book. And in fact, this book is the first inside account of what happened on January 6th. And so I take the reader through the events of the 2020 election leading up to January 6th. I take them through the evidence of election fraud and voter fraud in November 2020, which the Democrats and the corporate media insist doesn't exist. I walk them through the litigation, all the different cases that went on, and I walk them through my being asked by the lawyers in the Pennsylvania case if the Supreme Court took that case for me to argue that case. I said, yes, I would be happy to. I walk in the book through President Trump asking me, with the Texas case at the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court took the Texas case, if I would argue that. And I told President Trump I'd be happy to. I walked them through that day on January 6th, where in the days beforehand, I worked to assemble a coalition of 11 senators to stand up and object and to demand an election commission and to examine the evidence of voter fraud. I walked through trying to keep that coalition together, standing up and objecting. And then I walked through the riot that happened, working to try to keep those senators together while some senators were getting wobbly. And I walked them through the whole narrative to understand what happened. So if you're at home talking to people about January 6th, the left uses wildly politicized terms like insurrection, which is complete political garbage. Anyone who uses that word is engaged in partisan spin. I walked through what happened that day. And the contrast, and your question was exactly right. What the Biden DOJ has done is it's used the actions of a handful of people on that day who committed acts of violence. And let me be clear. Anyone who commits an act of violence should be prosecuted. If you assault a police officer, you should go to jail for a long time. That's true whether I agree with you or disagree with you, whether you're right wing or left wing. If you assault a cop, you're going to jail. What the Biden DOJ has done is it's used the violent acts of a few to target and smear the tens of thousands of peaceful protesters who were in Washington on January 6th, and more fundamentally, the tens of millions of conservatives and Trump voters across this country. And the double standard is ridiculous. At the same time, they ignore the Black Lives Matter and Antifa rioters who firebombed police cars, who looted homes, who murdered police officers, who committed horrific crimes. Kamala Harris, the sitting vice president, bailed out of jail violent protesters who were engaged in Black Lives Matter and Antifa protests. And I ask in the book questions like, who is Ray Epps? Why are the January 6th prisoners treated differently than other prisoners? Why are so many in solitary confinement? All of these are questions that this DOJ, were it fair, were it impartial, would be willing to answer. But they simply stonewall. And you want to know what the stakes of this election are? The stakes of this election are the rule of law. You and I both revere the Constitution and the rule of law. Why do we have prosperity in America where much of the developing world doesn't? Because we've had the rule of law, because our judicial system is not just a political weapon to persecute the enemies of the president. Well, under Barack Obama and now Joe Biden, that is what it's becoming, and that is extraordinarily dangerous.
The book is Justice Corrupted, How the Left Weaponized Our Legal System. Very, very important book. What would you say about law enforcement generally in this country? I see a distinction between local law enforcement and what's happened to the FBI.
Well, listen, police officers across this country are heroes, and they're feeling demoralized and undermined by Democrats and the radicals in this party. One of the things I talk about is how President Biden is nominated, and every Democrat has voted to confirm not one, not two, but three of the leading proponents of abolishing and defunding the police to senior positions at the Department of Justice. Not only that, I talk about George Soros prosecutors, a really dangerous phenomenon where Soros has put millions in terms of electing radicals who let violent criminals go. I talk about, for example, the Waukesha Christmas parade murderer, that mass murderer who drove his SUV into the crowd, murdering children, murdering little old ladies. He had gone in and out with a left-wing George Soros prosecutor who kept letting him go. That is happening across this country, and it is radicalized. It is dangerous, and I try to connect it to this is a direct threat. You know, you talk about Marxist a lot. This book goes into critical race theory and Ketanji Brown Jackson. I was at Harvard Law School with Ketanji Brown Jackson. I bring readers in to the origins of critical race theory, how it is explicitly Marxist. And the Soros prosecutors are also explicitly Marxist. They come in and say, one of the ways to undermine our criminal justice system is take over the role of the prosecutor and simply refuse to lock up criminals. And that danger is profound. Listen, you and I, neither one of us want to see a Republican Department of Justice. We don't want to see a Democrat Department of Justice. We want to see a Department of Justice and an FBI that follows the law fairly and impartially. This book walks through Crossfire Hurricane and how the Obama DOJ and the intelligence community targeted Donald Trump, fabricated documents, engaged in an absolute corrupt persecution with the Hillary Clinton party. And let me say this finally. Last time I went on your show was my last book, One Vote Away. We went on the show, One Vote Away, shot to #1 on the Amazon bestseller list. We released it right when Ruth Bader Ginsburg had died. This book, as it's coming out, I'm hopeful we'll see the same thing. And I got to say, this DOJ is exercising every day the abuse of power that we're talking about. This book explains why, and it explains why this election in November matters so much.
Superb. It's a great book, folks. Justice Corrupted, How the Left Weaponized Our Legal System. I encourage you to go to Amazon.com, any major bookstore. Ted, thank you, my friend. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Mark.
We'll be right back.